4,000 years ago, an Egyptian physician sat down and recorded exactly what each plant in his medicine chest could do and what it could do wrong. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents ever found, didn't just list remedies, it listed warnings, dosages, failure points, the situations where the plant that healed you last week would kill you this week if you weren't paying attention. Those healers weren't careless, they were the opposite of careless. They knew these plants so precisely that they trusted their lives to them, which meant they also knew exactly where the line was. Here's what nobody tells you. The people selling you those same plants today know about that line too. They just don't tell you where it is. Because the part that sells is the healing story. The part that protects you, the warning, the dosage, the contraindication, the toxic lookalike. That part doesn't move product. Today I'm going through 10 plants that ancient healers understood completely, both sides of them, and I'm going to tell you the half that modern sellers skip. Stay with me for number 4, because what ancient midwives knew about that plant and what's printed on the label today are so different it should make you genuinely angry. And stay for number 1, because that one was used as a weapon long before it was sold as a supplement, and that history is still directly relevant to how you're probably using it right now. 10 plants. Every one of them is sold in stores or grown in home gardens right now. Every one of them has a documented ancient history that includes a warning that the modern market is stripped out. I've cross-referenced these against historical medical texts, traditional herbal records, and current safety data, because this channel exists to give you the complete picture, not the half that's profitable. Number 4 is a plant you probably know as a digestive aid. Ancient Greek physicians recorded it as beneficial in precise doses and catastrophically dangerous in slightly larger ones. That distinction exists nowhere on the label. And number 1, the final plant on this list, was documented in medieval European texts as requiring handling gloves before it was ever taken internally. Most people who buy it today have never been told to wear gloves near it at all. If you're part of this community, the people who want the full story, not the sanitized version, subscribe now. What's coming is the kind of information that used to be common knowledge and was quietly retired because it complicated the sale. Plant 1. Comfrey. Comfrey has been used since at least 400 BC. The ancient Greeks called it symphyton, meaning to unite, and used it on broken bones and wounds with detailed instructions about preparation and duration. Dioscorides, who wrote one of the most important botanical references in history, included comfrey, and he also included the observation that internal use required care. But here's what most people miss. Comfrey contains pyrrolizidine alkaloids, compounds that accumulate in the liver over time and are associated with serious liver damage with prolonged internal use. The ancient healers who used this plant did so topically, for short durations, with specific preparation methods. Modern sellers who sell comfrey tea or internal supplements have access to that same history. The word symphyton is right there in the botanical record. The restriction is right there too. The liver damage associated with pyrrolizidine alkaloids doesn't show up overnight. It accumulates, which is exactly why the warning feels unnecessary until it isn't. Use comfrey topically on bruises and sprains as historical use suggests. Never take it internally without serious medical guidance. The ancient healers who loved this plant most were also the ones who drew the line. The warning was always there. Plant 2. Wormwood. Wormwood appears in the Book of Revelation, in ancient Egyptian medicine, and in the herbal traditions of virtually every Mediterranean culture going back 3,000 years. It was used to treat intestinal parasites, and it worked, which is why it survived across so many traditions. The active compound, thujone, is genuinely effective against certain parasitic infections. But here's what most people miss. Thujone is also a neurotoxin in sufficient quantities. The 19th century absinthe crisis, where widespread neurological symptoms appeared in heavy drinkers of wormwood-based liqueur, was documented, studied, and ultimately resulted in the banning of absinthe across most of Europe by 1915. That history is not obscure, it is well recorded. Modern sellers of wormwood supplements are selling into that same history and not always flagging it. Short-term use, under guidance for specific parasitic infections, has historical precedent. Long-term use or high-dose use has a documented neurological risk that ancient healers noted and the absinthe crisis confirmed. Scripture mentioned it as a symbol of bitterness and suffering. That wasn't arbitrary. The plant earns that association. The warning was always there. Plant 3. Pennyroyal. Pennyroyal has been documented in ancient Greek, Roman, and later medieval European herbalism. It was listed by Pliny the Elder. It appears in culinary and medicinal records going back more than 2,000 years. The Romans used it as a flea repellent, a flavoring, and a medicinal herb. But here's what most people miss. Pennyroyal was also one of the most widely documented abortifacients in ancient medicine, meaning ancient healers knew it could terminate a pregnancy. That use was explicit in historical records. Modern sellers who market pennyroyal as a digestive herb or minty flavoring are selling a plant whose historical dossier includes that warning in the first paragraph, and they're not mentioning it. The compound responsible is pulegone, which the liver metabolizes into a toxic byproduct. Pennyroyal oil has caused documented fatalities at doses that might seem modest. Even pennyroyal tea in significant amounts carries real risk, especially for pregnant women. Ancient healers didn't hide what this plant did. The Roman texts are specific. The medieval herbals are specific. The warning was deliberately built into how it was documented. That specificity got quietly dropped somewhere between the apothecary and the supplement aisle. The warning was always there. Plant 4. Greater celandine. Greater celandine, Chelidonium majus, was used by ancient Greek physicians and documented in European herbalism throughout the medieval period. It was applied to warts, used for liver and gallbladder complaints, and considered a significant medicinal plant for centuries. Paracelsus, the 16th century Swiss physician who is sometimes called the father of toxicology, worked with it extensively. But here's what most people miss. Paracelsus is also the man who said, "The dose makes the poison," and he was specifically thinking about plants like this one. Greater celandine contains alkaloids including chelidonine and sanguinarine that have genuine pharmacological activity. They also have a documented toxicity window that is extremely narrow. Ancient midwives and herbalists who used this plant knew those doses precisely, passed them down carefully, and treated this as a plant you respected rather than consumed casually. Modern sellers who market greater celandine supplements for liver and gallbladder support are selling into a tradition where the dosing precision was the entire point. The European Medicines Agency has issued formal warnings about liver toxicity associated with greater celandine products. Cases of serious liver injury have been reported in otherwise healthy people who took it at doses that seemed reasonable. The ancient physicians who documented this plant wrote down the dose. Modern labels routinely omit it. The warning was always there. We're halfway through, and the next 5 plants are where this gets even more specific. These are plants sold actively right now, in garden centers, in supplement stores, in grocery store herb sections, with ancient warnings attached to them that have been quietly retired. Stay with me. This is the information that used to be considered basic. Plant 5. Elderberry. Elderberry has an extraordinary historical record. Hippocrates called the elder tree his medicine chest. Indigenous American healers, European folk medicine traditions, and historical records from multiple continents all document elderberry as one of the most versatile medicinal plants available. The flowers, the ripe berries, and the bark have been used for centuries. But here's what most people miss. Every part of the elder plant except the ripe berry contains sambunagrin, a cyanogenic glycoside that releases cyanide compounds when metabolized. Unripe berries, raw berries, the leaves, the bark, the roots, all of them. The ancient healers who praised this plant so extensively were also the ones who cooked the berries, who dried them carefully, who knew which parts were off limits. That processing knowledge was inseparable from the medicinal knowledge. They didn't separate them because you can't. Modern elderberry gummies, syrups, and supplements made from properly processed ripe berries are generally considered safe. The danger arises when people grow elder in their gardens, eat the unripe fruit directly off the plant, or attempt to make their own preparations without understanding which parts are toxic raw. Hippocrates didn't call it his medicine chest and then eat it raw off the branch. The processing was the medicine. The warning was always there. Plant 6. Sassafras. Sassafras was one of the most celebrated medicinal plants among indigenous North American peoples and became one of the first major plant exports from North America to Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries. European physicians praised it for a wide range of conditions. It was used as a flavoring, a tea, a medicine, and a tonic. The early colonial economy partially depended on it. But here's what most people miss. Sassafras root bark contains safrole, a compound the FDA banned from use in food and beverages in 1960 after animal studies showed it caused liver tumors at significant doses. Traditional root beer was originally made from sassafras. It isn't anymore, and there's a reason. Safrole is now listed as a probable human carcinogen by multiple international health bodies. This doesn't mean the plant has no history of safe traditional use. It clearly does. It means the people who used it traditionally did so with specific preparation methods, specific parts of the plant, and in contexts that limited long-term cumulative exposure. Selling sassafras bark or oil as a health product today, without flagging that the primary active compound is a banned food additive, is a selective use of history that ancient healers would not have recognized as honest. The warning was always there. Plant 7. Colt's foot. Colt's foot, Tussilago farfara, was one of the most commonly used cough remedies in European herbal medicine going back to ancient Rome. Its Latin name, Tussilago, comes from tussis, meaning cough. It was strongly associated with respiratory relief. The dried leaves were smoked, made into tea, and used in syrups across dozens of herbal traditions. But here's what most people miss. Colt's foot also contains pyrrolizidine alkaloids, the same family of liver-damaging compounds found in comfrey. Ancient use was typically short-term and often involved specific preparations that reduced alkaloid content. Long-term or high-dose use has been associated with serious liver damage in modern case reports. Germany's Commission E, the regulatory body that evaluates herbal medicines, withdrew approval for internal coltsfoot preparations specifically because of this risk. Coltsfoot is still sold in herbal teas and supplement blends in many markets. It is still marketed using its ancient respiratory credentials. The pyrrolizidine alkaloid content rarely appears on the label. The Roman physicians who named this plant after its cough-relieving properties also lived in a world where herbal knowledge came with dosage limits attached. They didn't invent those limits arbitrarily. The warning was always there. Plant 8. Licorice root. Licorice root has one of the longest documented medicinal histories of any plant on Earth. Ancient Egyptian records include it. It appears in traditional Chinese medicine texts dating back thousands of years. It was found in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Ancient healers across multiple continents and traditions considered it a foundational medicinal plant. But here's what most people miss. Glycyrrhizin, the primary active compound in licorice root, raises blood pressure and depletes potassium at elevated doses. This is not a fringe finding. The FDA has a formal advisory on it. The European Food Safety Authority has established daily limits. Cases of severe hypokalemia, dangerously low potassium, have been documented in people consuming large amounts of real licorice products. One documented case involved a 10-day period of high licorice intake, causing a near-fatal cardiac event in an otherwise healthy adult. Ancient texts on licorice frequently specified duration of use. Traditional Chinese medicine classifies it as a harmonizing herb, one that modifies the effects of other herbs, and specifies that it is not meant for extended, isolated use at high doses. That precision is missing from most modern supplement labels, which lean on the 4,000 years of use credibility without carrying over the "here's how to use it without harming yourself" instruction. Tutankhamun was buried with licorice root. He was also 19 years old when he died under circumstances still debated by historians. Perhaps unrelated, the warning was always there. Plant 9. Blue Cohosh. Blue Cohosh, Caulophyllum thalictroides, was used extensively by indigenous North American peoples, primarily as a uterine stimulant to assist with difficult labors. It was adopted into 19th century American herbal practice and appeared in the United States pharmacopoeia. Midwives used it with specific intent and specific understanding of what it did. But here's what most people miss. Blue Cohosh is a documented uterotonic, meaning it causes uterine contractions. This is precisely what it was used for in traditional midwifery, to stimulate labor that had stalled. Using it during pregnancy at any other stage carries a documented risk of miscarriage. There are case reports of neonatal heart failure associated with blue cohosh use by mothers close to term. And yet blue cohosh is sold as a general women's herb in supplement form, with labeling that sometimes doesn't specify any of this. The traditional midwives who used this plant knew exactly what it did to the uterus, because that was the point. They used it for that specific action in that specific context. Taking that specific action out of context, removing the midwife's judgment, and selling it as a general herbal supplement for women is a particular kind of recklessness dressed up as tradition. This is not a plant that got misunderstood. It's a plant that got selectively marketed. The warning was always there. Plant 10. Foxglove. This is the one that ancient healers handled with gloves, and not metaphorically. Foxglove, Digitalis purpurea, has been documented in European folk medicine since at least the medieval period. The Welsh physicians of Myddfai, documented in 13th century manuscripts, used it. It appeared in herbal records across Britain and continental Europe for centuries before William Withering systematically documented its cardiac effects in 1785 in his landmark work on the treatment of dropsy. Withering's work didn't discover foxglove's power. It formalized what folk healers had already known for generations. What those folk healers also knew, and what Withering was extremely careful to document, was that foxglove was among the most acutely dangerous plants in the European herbal tradition. Medieval herbals warned against casual use. Withering's own book included clear dosage warnings and descriptions of toxicity symptoms. The plant's cardiac glycosides, digitoxin, digoxin, and related compounds, affect the electrical system of the heart. In therapeutic doses, they can save the life of someone with heart failure. In doses slightly above that, they can cause fatal arrhythmia in a heart that was functioning fine before. But here's what most people miss. Foxglove is not rare. It is a common garden plant. It is sold in garden centers across the country as an ornamental, which it genuinely is because it's beautiful. And it is sold, potted, and labeled and placed next to petunias, with no warning that every part of it is toxic enough that even touching it and then touching your mouth can cause symptoms. Children have died from eating foxglove flowers. Adults have been poisoned by drinking water from a vase that held foxglove stems. The ancient folk healers who used this plant therapeutically kept it separate from everything else. The medieval herbalists who recorded it were specific about who should handle it and how. William Withering tracked every patient he treated with it and documented every adverse outcome because he understood that precision was the only thing standing between medicine and poison. Modern garden centers sell it next to snapdragons. The people who understood this plant most deeply were also the most cautious with it. That caution has been stripped out entirely. Not because we know more than the medieval Welsh physicians, but because caution doesn't help sell a flat of ornamental flowers. The warning was always there. It was in the medieval manuscripts. It was in Withering's 1785 documentation. It was in the gloves the old healers wore before they even picked it. And it's missing from the label. Ancient healers were not naive. They were not guessing. The people who gave us the medical foundations that modern pharmacology still draws from, Egyptian physicians, Greek botanists, medieval herbalists, indigenous plant keepers, understood these plants the way you only understand something when your life and your community's life depend on getting it right. They documented the healing. They also documented the danger. They understood that the two were inseparable, that the same compound that made a plant worth using was often the compound that made careless use lethal. That precision was the knowledge. It wasn't a footnote. It was the whole point. What you're seeing in the modern supplement and gardening market is not ignorance of that history. These are ancient plants with ancient records that anyone can access. What you're seeing is a choice to carry forward the half of the history that sells and to quietly retire the half that complicates the transaction. You now know both halves. That's what this community is here for. Not to make you afraid of plants. These are remarkable, powerful, historically validated organisms. But to give you what the ancient healers gave the people they were responsible for. The complete picture, the real dosage, the actual warning. The knowledge never left. We just stopped looking. Here's what I want to know. Which of these 10 plants is already in your home right now? In your garden, on your windowsill, in your supplement cabinet? Drop it in the comments. And if you already knew about one of these warnings, if someone passed this down to you, I want to hear that too. That kind of knowledge gets preserved in communities, and this is that community. If you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. This channel covers the complete history of plants, not just the half that's profitable. Every week, something your garden center didn't tell you. Hit subscribe and stay with us. The warning was always there. Now you know where to look.